Welcome, everybody, to the Single Point division of Rouge Radio podcast powered by the Canadian Football Podcast Network. My name is Robert Dalton, and joining, as always, Mr. Tony Allen. We're in the midst of our 9 teams in 9 weeks, and this week we're in the nation's capital, and we bring on the one, the only, Jeannine Ritchot from the Mouchoir Podcast, also part of the Canadian Podcast Network. Jeannine, how's that for an introduction?
That's a pretty great introduction. It's I have some letters added to my title, CFPN, so I kind of like that.
Do you have like a business card for that?
I think we need to get one. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into this here. So hey, I had some free time, which is rare with 3 kids, and had a day off. So I went to listen to your most recent episode, which was back in February, and you guys listed all the people that left for free agency, and it's a long list, and the guys that you brought in are a huge meh to me, a whole lot of meh. But then you listed the guys that you've retained. And so would it be a fair statement that the future, at least the short-term future, isn't as bleak as people would say it is?
I think there's definitely a lot of question marks that Ottawa fans and those of us who talk about this team certainly still have. But I think one of the things that makes it maybe not quite as bleak is that we do still have a lot of the strengths that we have last year. And when you look at our defense in particular, the same faces. We had a pretty solid defense last year. Noel Thornton made a lot of changes. That unit really gelled as a team. I think there's going to be a lot of stability there. Did add one name that I think you probably don't find so mad, Dalt. That was Chris Randall coming over from Winnipeg. So we did do a little bit of bolstering on defense, but I think people are feeling pretty good about that. The big question mark is really going to be on offense, and it's not even so much the players. It's really with the quarterback question hanging over us, and with Jamie Elizondo leaving the way he did in April, and going to this committee of offensive coordinator, I think people are just really wondering what kind of magic can Marcel Desjardins and Rick Campbell pull out of their hats this year.
So I think what I want to do is just obviously address the biggest elephant in the room for the Red Blacks going into the season is Trevor Harris. And I can't 100% remember what you said on your last podcast, but it was about things that was said between Harris and the Red Blacks that made him leave. And whatever it was you said, I wish I could remember off the top of my head. I couldn't jot it down. But the first thing that popped into my head, it's like, boy, that sounded like a real reason or an excuse, not a reason. That sounds kind of like an excuse to justify what he did. My real question is, like, when it's time for Trevor Harris to come back, what kind of reception is it going to be for him when he gets to Ottawa? Because seriously, that's the biggest elephant in the room for the Ottawa franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely took everybody by surprise. We all knew Riley was likely going to leave Edmonton, and we all kind of saw that coming, but nobody in our nation saw it being Trevor Harris replacing him. And the interviews that we heard from both Trevor Harris and actually Greg Ellingson in the end, after they decided to leave, it was apparently coming down to bonuses. They had agreed to the basics of the contract, and it all kind of came down to bonuses. And so there was definitely, we all got the taste that there was some bad feelings, which is an unfortunate thing, but it's also part of the business. I don't think people are too angry at Trevor Harris in the fan base anyway. I don't think he's going to get major boos when he comes back here. I think he really grew as a quarterback last year with this team and gave us another shot at a Grey Cup in our short history, and I think fans are going to respect that. I think in the beginning, fans were maybe a little bit more mad at the GM than they were at the quarterback for the situation. So now that with the passage of time, that was back in February, people have sort of calmed down. They've realized that there is going to be life after Trevor Harris. Signing Jonathan Jennings and giving us a couple of options at quarterback probably helped. But I don't think there's going to be too much bad blood for Trevor when he steps on the field here. I forget when Edmonton is in town this year, but I think he'll still have a pretty warm reception from Ottawa fans.
Let's talk about this quarterback position, because I think it was Dave Naylor who listed Trevor Harris as well as Matt Nichols, tried to throw in the Winnipeg connection there. He said that that he had something to prove, right, before he took that next step to being an elite quarterback. And in my opinion, for people who are long-standing fans of this podcast, will know that he's a great quarterback, and I'm referring to Trevor Harris, but somewhere around October, he kind of starts slipping. Now, we didn't really see that. So now that he kind of, I don't want to say that he took the next step, he went to make that next step, and then obviously people in Ottawa aren't going to really focus, or they're not going to be able to see that firsthand. They brought in a guy whose last great season was 3 years ago, and I'm referring to Jonathan Jennings. His backup was a guy that couldn't swim in Paul LaPolice's system, a guy who has made Matt Nichols seem like the next Dieter Brock in Winnipeg. But does that count as my as a name drop, ceremonial name drop there?
He's a pretty big one, though. That's a pretty big one.
Name to drop.
Yeah, no, we're going to give a big negatory on that one.
So you go from Trevor Harris, who had the question marks, to Jonathan Jennings, who has asterisks, who's got @ symbols, basically anything that is used to perform swear words without actually using the swear words in text format. So how's the quarterback situation, or at least what is the outlook as far as our nation is concerned?
I think probably people in Ottawa are split down the middle as to who they think is going to get the start. In training camp, Davis got the first reps on the opening day of camp. Rick Campbell has come out and said we had to give first reps to somebody. We gave them to the guy that was with us. It was pretty split even between Davis and Jennings all throughout camp. My suspicion is that the two of them are probably going to compete for a good chunk of the season for starter, and we might see a little bit more mobile quarterbacking in Ottawa than perhaps we've been used to seeing throughout the franchise history. It's an interesting matchup, though, because I think Jennings is looking for redemption. He came out like a house on fire when he had to step in for an injured Travis Lulay a few years ago in BC, and everybody was talking about the second coming. That was Jonathan Jennings. So certainly he's got something to prove, and maybe a change of pace is what he needs. And I think Davis also has something to prove, but from everything I hear, the coaching staff seems to really like him and they see something in him. My suspicion is that Davis is going to get the start in the first game of the season, but make one mistake and Jonathan Jennings is going to be nipping at his heels. So I think we might see a bit of rotation at QB for a little while before things settle. But they're both really hungry for the job and they both really want it. So it makes for some interesting, it will at least be entertaining for fans to kind of see these two and how they react to the pressure.
Let's go back, because you mentioned Marcel Desjardins and his negotiating with free agents. He said that the salary cap wasn't going to go up, and he got roasted, like, big time on Twitter. And my hand is up because I'm guilty of that. Now that the CBA was ratified, he was proven right. So are the pitchforks in Ottawa being put away? Because they seem to have been wanting his job back in February.
Oh, you're 100% right, Daltz. Pitchforks were absolutely out. And you said you were listening to that episode Michaela and I put out in February, and I wouldn't say we had pitchforks, but we were certainly asking that question, like, surely there's a little bit more money on the table that you could put some money out there to keep some of these guys. But he looks like a genius after the results of the CBA, and the salary is going up by $50,000, which is exactly what it was under the previous CBA. Now, with the revenue sharing, there'll be some room maybe in later years, but that's not going to hit for a while. So he's always had the mentality that this is truly a team, and he wants to invest in the team as a whole, not just in one or two key players. And that's been his system. And I think now people are maybe a little bit more willing to trust him. So yeah, I would say pitchforks set aside. They might come back out depending on how this season goes.
We know those passionate football fan bases. Yeah, you make one mistake, it doesn't matter how good you are. The next question I have is probably, I hope it doesn't result in a dial tone. Brad Sinopoli.
Yes. Yeah.
He's on the wrong side of 30, and Don't want to say that he's lost a few, but he was a formidable receiver, top tier receiver. But this is probably going to be the first time where he's going to be the guy. You know, he's got I think he's got R.J. Harris with him. Ryan Langford's coming over. Caleb Hawley's coming over from Saskatchewan, but he's the guy. It looks like. What kind of pressure is Brad Sinopoli facing, and do you think that he can exceed expectations as the number one guy in Ottawa?
Well, you know I'm always going to have my boy Brad's back, right?
Oh, I know it. Yeah. By the way, thank you for not hanging up on us. Brad.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm from friendly Manitoba too, so I don't hang up on people. No, I think Brad is definitely. Everybody's talking about how he's likely to be the go-to receiver. He's an extremely talented receiver, and he's had a job in the system, in the Elizondo system, where he's not the big player. He's not the player that makes the big plays like the Ellingsons and the Spencers. He's not the guy who goes long down the field. He's the guy that does a lot of the work after the catch. He's there in shorter situations, and then he uses his big body to get a lot of plays. It's hard to imagine him becoming one of those big Greg Ellingson type players. And so I actually don't think his role is going to change that much. I think they're going to continue to use him the same way that they have. There is a lot of talent in people like R.J. Harris, Dominic Rhymes. We didn't get to see a lot of it because there were the Ellingsons and there were the Spencers on the team. But I think that we're going to see those guys really come into their own and emerge this year. Another guy that I'm really looking forward to seeing is we got in the draft Wesley Lewis, and he's a 6'6" receiver out of the U.S., and we have never had such a big guy at receiver. Now, I don't think he's going to, he's a rookie. He's not going to light it up necessarily in his first year, but I think we're going to see him make some appearances in the offense as well. And I think it's really going to be, there might not be one guy who shines this year. There's going to be a real need for everybody to step it up and show their place. So at least that's what I'm hoping.
So you kind of celebrating an anniversary this year. It is 5 years for Ottawa Red Blacks football, I believe, from when your season started. And I think it's pretty fair to say, as football fans, you have been pretty spoiled. If it was to happen, do you think there's been enough foundation laid in the first 5 years that Ottawa football could survive a couple of ugly seasons?
Yeah, it is a good question, and I get asked the question about being spoiled a lot because it's true. We've been to the Grey Cup 3 times in 4 years, and our history as a franchise is 5 years. So we've definitely been a lucky fan base to see that kind of success so early. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was so hard back in free agency, is people were already imagining, oh my God, what does this mean for the team? There's no doubt about it that if this team goes through a serious downturn this season, there's going to be people that are going to have a lot to say on Twitter. The pitchforks that Dalt's talked about are going to come back out. But I can't underscore enough when I talk about this team that one of the reasons I love them as much as I do is their involvement in the community. And I know that every team to some aspect is involved in the community. And that's not really new in the CFL, but the Ottawa Red Blacks really seem to have made Ottawa and the people of Ottawa such a big part of their identity. And the fans respond to that. So there's going to be it's going to be tough to see a team that's done so well perhaps struggle. I'm not quite sure yet if I'm willing to say that this season is going to be I'm not going to say it's going to be all rosy. I'm not wearing my rose-colored glasses. I also don't think it's going to be a complete failure. I think we're going to see some new folks step into new roles. We're going to see some growth. It's not going to be as pretty as some of the other seasons, but I think the fans are going to stay true to this team because this team stays true to this community. And that we've just created a relationship with this team that it's really hard to ignore that.
Okay, and then I want to follow that up too with another quick question, because you're not just a CFL Red Blacks fan. You also like to support the university side of football. Are you seeing much trickle down into fandom, attendances, excitement for the GGs because there's so much success with Ottawa?
The Panda game, which is the annual matchup between the two rival Ottawa universities, so the University of Ottawa GGs and the Carleton University Ravens.
I suppose we love the Ravens, right?
No, I love the GGs. I will hang up if you're a Ravens fan. We're actually supposed to try to interview Nate Bahar for our next episode, and he was a Raven, so I think they gave him to me on purpose because they know where my university loyalty lies. But that Panda game, it's held at TD Place, 24,000. It's a complete sellout every single time, and I think a lot of that has to do with the football culture. That the football culture was kind of always here in Ottawa. It was just asleep for a few years, so it's like the rejuvenation of the football culture. Unfortunately, outside of the Panda game, GG's games are still, lower attendance. I think probably the same for Ravens. We just don't. University hockey is and hockey in general is kind of the bigger sport here in Canada, and that's okay. But the university teams also are finding a way to make themselves known a little bit more in the community. I go to a touchdown dinner every year for the GGs where they induct new members into the Hall of Fame, and there's a growing collection of people there year after year, and a lot of CFL players come back to these dinners to the places that they played football and to see some of the old gangs. So I would say that it's helping for sure to have such a strong CFL team. Maybe not trickling down as much as I would like to see it trickle down, but it's definitely starting.
You make fun of Brad Sinopoli, she stays on the line, but God forbid that you're a fan of the Ravens.
Hey, Brad was a GG. He understands.
All right, so one last question before we get your final prediction. Okay, so we let's go back to the football side here, because we talked about how lack of firepower the offense may have. On the other side, defensively, not much of a turnover, and you mentioned Chris Randall being added. Studs like Jonathan Rose, pending his first game suspension, if that actually comes true. Sherrod Baltimore, guys like that. Is the defense good enough to keep up with the Ticats for first in the East, or are they good enough to offset what potential lack of offense that the offensive side may have?
I do think that the defense is good enough. The defense made great strides last year compared to the season before, and that was because of Noel Thorpe. You don't change something that doesn't need to be changed, and I think that's why you saw so little happen on defense in the off season, because we still got we've got the core, the heart of the defense in players like Pruno, players like Rose, who you mentioned, Sherrod Baltimore, who spent a good chunk of last season on the practice roster but stuck it out here and played his heart out and made his way back into the starting lineup, stayed here in Ottawa over the winter because he loves this place so much. Can you believe it? I wanted to leave Ottawa for the winter and go somewhere else. But so these guys are kind of like the heart and soul of the defense, and they've really gelled as a unit. You saw it in training camp, all the work that they're doing with the new rookies coming in. I think that this defense is going to be able to carry us through some tougher times in the East, because I do think that we're not going to have the time in the East that we have had in the last couple of seasons. But I have a lot of confidence in this defense being able to, shut down a Mazzoli-led offense in Hamilton. And, we still don't know who the quarterback is going to be in Montreal. And I think we just heard that Franklin is getting the start for Toronto, but he's had, some ups and downs, and he's been a bit shaky. So I think this defense has a shot at getting us into playoff position.
Well, you just insulted Franklin, so I can guarantee you Andrew is not going to want to come on your show anytime soon. All right, Jeannine, before you go, where do you see the Red Blacks finish in the East this year?
Oh, it's a tough one. I've been not looking forward to this question all day long.
18-0? Just say 18-0.
Just pull a Ryan and say 18-0. No, I do think it's probably going to be a little below 500 this year. I'm thinking 8-10. I do think it's going to be a tough season, but I think it's going to be enough to get us into playoff contention. I just don't see Montreal turning things around, and with everything up in the air about ownership, there's still a lot of distractions going on in Montreal. They've made a lot of good changes in the off season, but I just don't think it's enough. Toronto could be the outlier this year with bringing Chamberlain in as head coach, and if Franklin can find his feet and grow as a quarterback, then they made some pretty significant moves in the off season. Maybe they're going to challenge more than I'd like to admit, but right now I'm going to say we're going to come in second place, and 8-10 is going to be good enough for second place in the East this year.
Awesome. So Jeannine Ritchot, co-host with Michaela on the Mouchoir Podcast, proud member of the Canadian Podcast Network. Jeannine, thanks again for staying up late with us, and congratulations, if we didn't say it before, on being new members of said network.
Oh, thank you so much, you guys, for having me on this show, and thrilled to be part of the network with all of you great podcasts this year. Looking forward to working more closely together over the year.